Reefer Madness is an exploitation film along the same veins as marijuana, which sought to publicize the dangers of drug use. It was originally produced in 1936 under the title Tell Your Children and was financed by a church group to educate parents about cannabis. Our old buddy Dwain Esper caught wind of it, bought the film, spliced in some racy content, and began distributing in 1938. It was released using different titles depending on the region and is also known as Doped Youth and The Burning Question. This is one of, if not the most recognizable anti-drug exploitation films of all time. The film was shown all the way up through the 50s and was later used for more satirical reasons during the 70s by organizations seeking to reform cannabis laws. Technically, it violated censorship laws at the time, but was able to sneak by since it masqueraded as a morality film. Reefer Madness is a cult classic and has been parodied many times, my favorite being Season 3, Episode 1 of that 70s show. So that was a little background on the movie, let's get to the flick. It opens with a scrolling forward which highlights the drug menace and warns the audience. It describes the effects of marijuana use starting with uncontrollable laughter, followed by hallucinations, time dilation, crazy thoughts, emotional trauma, then a complete loss of control resulting in shocking acts of violence and inevitably ending with incurable insanity.
Thanks to marijuana, I'm incurably insane.
Then it goes on to explain that while the events in the movie are fictional, it is based on actual research and seeks to inform so that something can be done about the problem, because your sons and daughters could be next.
This is what's happening all over America, and it could happen in your home, or yours, or yours.
We start off with a classic montage of newspaper headlines about police and organizations fighting the marijuana scourge. There's a PTA meeting featuring a Dr. Carroll where he speaks to a group of adults about the issue. He advocates for implementing a mandatory nationwide education program about the dangers of narcotics. The doctor explains that the problem exists in all corners of the country. Trafficking of marijuana has brought with it a larger issue of criminal activity and is also being challenged by law enforcement on all fronts. He reads a letter from a member of the Federal Narcotics Bureau which suggests that school parent organizations are vital in the fight against drugs. It then goes on to describe the distribution process, providing examples of ways the drugs can be hidden for safe transport. Dr. Carroll proceeds to tell a story about a specific case that happened in their city, which is where the movie really begins, in an apartment near a high school where a woman named May lives. We jump to the apartment where a man named Jack enters. He goes to the room where May is sleeping and wakes her up, explaining that there may be some kids up this afternoon. She doesn't want to get the children involved, but Jack shrugs her off. Although it doesn't clearly state it, he wants to sell drugs to them, of course. Jack goes to grab something out of the cupboard when the doorbell rings. He goes to answer while we watch May saucily put on some stockings. At the door are 3 people who Jack invites inside. Apparently they are customers for May. Jack says he's going to go run a couple of deliveries, then pick up some kids to bring back, because that's not creepy at all. May again expresses her disapproval of getting children involved, but Jack continues to disregard her complaints. He grabs the goods from the cupboard and is Oscar Mike. Next we see a group of guys walking on the sidewalk. One of them speaks to a guy named Ralph and invites him over to a party on Saturday at his grandma's, which Ralph confirms he will attend. The other guy walks off and then Ralph is met by Jack. They creepily spy a group of teenagers walking across the street. It seems that Ralph has been watching them and points them out to Jack. I guess they've been marked for corruption by drug dealers.
Very nice.
It quickly jumps back to the other 2 guys who were speaking to Ralph. One guy mentions to the other that he heard from his parents that Ralph doesn't come from a good family. Their parents are divorced and Ralph has been pretty much on his own and been in a few tough situations too, so they'd be best to keep away from him. It cuts back to Jack and Ralph as they approach the teens after they get in their car. We learn their names are Mary, Bill, and Mary's brother Jimmy. Ralph introduces them to Jack and then invites him to hang out. Mary and Bill are busy, they're going to go play some tennis, but Jimmy decides to join. So they head out and we jump over to some kind of malt shop. There's a guy playing the piano, very enthusiastically I might add, and people are chilling out with some sodas, smoking, and dancing. Ralph, Jack, and Jimmy walk in and Jimmy is accosted by Agnes who gets him to dance. The pianist decides to take a break and heads into a back room to light up a doobie. Jimmy takes over while he's gone to toke some reefer, and boy does he toke it. He goes crazy for this stuff. Who smokes like that? Like he's outside and it's real windy, protecting the cherry from going out. Jimmy finishes playing and they all decide to head out to a party, which ends up being at May and Jack's apartment. We then see Bill and Mary again after they finish their tennis session. Mary's mom comes out and brings them some hot chocolate, which Bill really appreciates.
Gosh, hot chocolate.
They have some sappy conversation and Bill recites some Romeo and Juliet. Mary's mother watches a bit and then comes out when they kiss, which of course startles Bill because he knows he's supposed to keep his hands off the goods. After which he backs away embarrassed and falls into a pond, then leaves. Looks like the film has successfully established that these two are good and innocent, so naturally it's only a matter of time before they're screwed. We then see Bill at home with his parents and little brother who teases him about having a girlfriend.
Bill's got a girl.
They horseplay a bit and Bill's little brother asks him to fix his model airplane. Aww, how sweet. Next we see Jimmy driving a car. He stops and meets Bill and they decide to go grab a root beer. They meet up with Ralph and a woman named Blanche and join them at their table. Jimmy asks how May is doing and Blanche says that they're going over to her apartment later. He asks if Bill can come and Bill resists, but eventually concedes and decides to go. Wrong choice, Billy boy. It cuts to the apartment where things are in full swing. There's a bunch of youths going wild with dancing that would make the town from Footloose crucify some folks. Jack answers the door and in comes Ralph, Blanche, Bill, and Jimmy. Agnes is already there too. Bill is a little off-put by all the raucous behavior, but Blanche steps up to show him a good time. May walks in and Blanche introduces her to Bill. She then goes into the kitchen where Jack is having a snack and they discuss Bill, a new target for corruption. She notices that they're out of reefer and sends Jack to go get some more. Can't expect to have a party without it.
I need that for the school children.
Jack's car is in the shop, so he enlists Jimmy to give him a ride to make the pickup. The party continues and everyone is having a good old dirty bad fun time. They're canoodling and getting frisky, but Bill isn't impressed. May comes out and passes around a few joints, presumably the last of the stock for now. Everyone lights up and Blanche gets Bill to trade out his regular cigarette for a joint, although it doesn't seem he knows what it really is. He puffs on it and from that moment on we know he's doomed, trapped in the embrace of the devil's lettuce.
I am hopelessly addicted.
Hopping over to Jack and Jimmy, they arrive at their destination. Jimmy bums a joint from Jack before he heads in to see his boss. They talk business and Jack requests to get some more product. Another employee comes in and complains about selling drugs to kids. The boss states that he can always arrange for him to be permanently retired and then tells him to kick rocks. So Jack gets the goods and heads out to the car to find a blitzed Jimmy ready to drive them back. They take off and Jimmy goes nuts behind the wheel, running a dude all the way over and speeding away. We are about 25 minutes into the movie, and this is the first negative representation of the effects of marijuana that we are actually shown. It's not a bad point either. You should never drive while under the influence of anything, although I think this depiction is a little bit extreme considering it suggests that cannabis made Jimmy drive like he was on cocaine instead. I'm also curious how he was able to just sit out on the street and smoke an entire joint while there were people walking around him. Maybe they just aren't able to recognize the smell? Well, anyway, we next see Mary at home eating and talking to her mother. Her mother says that they haven't seen Bill in a while and wonders if anything is wrong. Mary dismisses it and says nothing is going on. Her mother presses her and recommends they talk it out, obviously not buying what Mary is selling. Jimmy comes in and seems broken up about something, which we know is vehicular manslaughter, but he doesn't mention it. The film transitions to a federal investigation office where Dr. Carroll is discussing a drug ring in the city. The federal employee explains that marijuana is different than other narcotics because it grows wild all over the country. I don't know about you, but I've never run across any ditchweed these days, so I don't know what he's talking about. I'd be curious if that was true or not, though. He tells the doctor that because of this, there's no interstate commerce and thus the government can't do much about it, but he does encourage education programs. He also shows him a bunch of files related to marijuana cases and confirms that cases are increasing. They discuss a few cases including a marijuana-addicted boy who murdered his entire family with an axe. Jeez, I think that's a bit of a stretch for simply marijuana. That's more of a bath salts kind of incident. So it fades out and switches to Bill speaking with Dr. Carroll. It seems that Bill's been slipping in his schoolwork. The doctor believes something is wrong, but Bill brushes him off. Dr. Carroll presses him and asks if he's been hanging around with any nefarious individuals, to which Bill replies that he hasn't. We all know he's been lying, of course, and has been partying it up with his new weed buddies. The doctor tells him he can always come to him for help, and then Bill heads out. We see Mary hanging out at the tennis courts waiting for Bill to show up. A guy comes up and asks if she wants to play, then tells her that he hasn't seen Bill there for weeks. It seems he's too busy getting baked now to play tennis with his best girl. Back at the trap house, everyone is partying it up again. Jimmy's playing music and Bill is there having a good time with Blanche. May's in the kitchen and Jack comes in. It seems she's still upset with his business practices involving youths. Uh-oh, Bill and Blanche are getting extra frisky and stumble into a bedroom. Looks like they are all sexed up from the reefer and decide to take a break from their maniacal laughing to do a few two-person push-ups. Infidelity? Looks like Jimmy and Agnes are going nuts on the piano. She's so horned up she can't control herself. This guy is just having a good time watching from his chair, marinating in his smoke-induced mania. The film fades out and cuts to Mary and Jimmy's house. The cops show up investigating the hit and run. They only got partial plates and are investigating potential addresses. Of course we know this is the right one since Jimmy is the culprit. They grill Mary about the date of the accident and she lies to them, saying that she had the car with her and her mother the whole time. Suspicious of her brother, Mary goes out looking for him. She inquires at the soda shop and the counter jerk tells her that he was there but went over to May's apartment. He gives her the address and she bops on over. Ralph answers and invites her in and sits her down, stating that he thinks Jimmy left to take Agnes home. He immediately whips out a joint and offers her one too, which she doesn't know isn't a cigarette. Meanwhile, Bill is still in the next room with Blanche, having completed their trip to Pound Town. He's obviously distraught about what happened too, regretful of his unfaithful indiscretion. Looks like the giggle weed has hit Mary and she likes it. She doesn't like what happens next though as Ralph proceeds to try to have his way with her, attempting to remove her dress. Bill comes out and sees this, but to his drug-infused mind it looks like she is willingly unzipping her dress. He flips out and attacks Ralph, which in reality was completely justified since there's an issue of non-consent here. They fight a bit and Jack runs in after hearing the commotion. He pulls a gun and he and Bill wrestle with it, causing an accidental discharge which hits Mary in the back, killing her.
Marijuana has ended my young, promising life.
Jack tells Ralph and Blanche to hoof it out of there and forget everything that happened. He wipes off the gun and puts it in the now unconscious Bill's hand, then May brings some water and they use it to wake him up. He comes to and sees Mary dead on the couch. They lie to him, telling them that he killed her, while he proceeds to cry over her body. Meanwhile, Jack gets their story straight with May, telling her to say that the kids came over just for a few beers, she was in the kitchen, heard the shot, and found this. Jack goes back to the soda shop to find Jimmy. He pulls him aside and tells him that the guy Jimmy hit died. He reassures Jimmy that he won't tell anyone as long as Jimmy keeps his silence too. Next we are shown a newspaper headline about the trial for Bill and his accused murder of Mary. It joins the trial and Dr. Carroll is on the witness stand. He is questioned about Bill's behavior. He talks about how Bill used to be a good tennis player, but due to the effects of marijuana, he was missing the ball by several feet. He also tells a story how one time in class they were discussing Romeo and Juliet, but he burst into uncontrollable laughter. He explains that only 6 months ago, Bill was the model of an excellent student, good athlete, and a wonderful young man, but marijuana ruined it all. Then the film jumps over to Ralph and Blanche hanging out. Ralph is smoking furiously and seems to be really neurotic about the whole situation. Jack and May are there too, and she's really nervous about it all. Jack reassures her that they are safe from the cops, but is worried about Ralph. He decides to go see the boss to discuss the issue. He's concerned that Ralph is going to crack and expose them all. The boss advises him to make sure that he never hears the verdict from the trial since they think it'll push him over the edge. Sounds malevolent. It shows us a newspaper headline about the expected trial verdict, and we get to see a Dick Tracy reference. We go back to the trial where the prosecution is delivering their closing statements. He really drills it home, stating that Bill admitted to the killing, saying that he saw someone attacking Mary, yet was unable to produce any witnesses or show that there was anyone there with her at all. He posits that he was perfectly sane, caught sleeping with another woman, and then shot Mary out of anger. We all know this isn't true and that he was framed for an accident, only stressing the importance of investigation and gathering of evidence. Well, the court adjourns without us hearing any kind of closing statement from the defense, and the jury goes to deliberate. They're all convinced he was sane and should be convicted, except for one juror who believes there is doubt. It shows us a light cord swinging which turns into a noose for dramatic effect, suggesting that Bill is doomed. Well, the jury is out. They must have convinced the lone dissenter because they announced the verdict as guilty. The courtroom clears out and we go back to Ralph and Blanche. He's pacing around all crazy-like and demands that May brings him some more smoke. This dude is all messed up. He's all hopped up with incurable insanity, which is compounded by his guilt over the whole incident. He knows that Bill is innocent and doesn't want him to hang. Looks like he's cracking under the pressure. Blanche tries to soothe him with some music while he continues to get blazed out of his skull. He tells her to play faster and faster, and she does so while he continues to lose his mind. Jack comes in, and Ralph expresses that he believes Jack wants to kill him. Jack denies this, but Ralph strikes first, beating him over the head with a fire poker. He falls to the floor, and Ralph proceeds to paint the floor with his brains. Blanche screams in shock, but it transitions into uncontrollable bloodlust-induced laughter. A neighbor hears the commotion and calls the cops while Blanche tries to sue the catatonic Ralph. The police burst in and nab the lot of them. They interrogate May, and then we get a nice montage of cops storming the city, busting up the drug operation. The boss gets caught too. The whole thing comes crashing down. So now we are in the judge's chambers, and Blanche is there with her legal team to clear up some stuff. She admits what happens and spills the beans about Mary's murder and the cover-up by Jack. She breaks down and confesses her guilt in the involvement, stating that she was used to help lure people to the apartment. The judge considers this, accepts her confession, and states that he will overturn Bill's conviction to not guilty. He also states that she will have to be brought in as a witness in the case against Ralph. Obviously, Jack is dead, so there's nothing more that can be done about him. As she walks down the hall, she has flashbacks about her involvement in the events leading up to this moment, sees a window, and decides to end it all by taking a flying leap. We then see the judge explaining to Bill that his conviction has been overturned. He gives him a stern talking to, which essentially is a statement to the audience about the dangers of marijuana. He also says that he has to stay and watch Ralph's trial. They bring Ralph in, who looks like he's off his rocker. The prosecutor explains that the state is waiving the trial because he's hopelessly, incurably insane and should be instead tossed in the loony bin. Both the state and defense agree on this, so the judge makes it so. The story now over, the film returns to Dr. Carroll speaking at the PTA meeting. He reiterates that education is important and can help make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again. Then the movie ends with the iconic scene of the doctor pointing at everyone.
The next tragedy may be that of your daughter, or your son, or yours, or yours, or yours.
So there you have it. That was Reefer Madness. You'll notice that much like many other similar exploitation films, it doesn't really make a compelling argument about the dangers of marijuana. It mostly promotes the benefits of education, which is good, but it doesn't really highlight exactly what needs to be taught. It also provides incorrect information about the effects of the substance, opting to scare rather than inform with facts. Like most things in life, the problems shown in the film can be attributed to nefarious individuals and poor decision making. They also try to posit that marijuana is highly addictive, which is in fact false. It suggests that taking one puff can make you hopelessly addicted and start you down a terrible path.
Yep, all it takes is one puff to make you hopelessly addicted.
But really, marijuana was only portrayed to directly cause some of the events of the movie. And what things it did cause were generally based on incorrect information, extreme exaggeration of the effects of marijuana. Generally, many negative outcomes could have been avoided if better decisions were made, which certainly is an advocate for youth education. The hit and run could have easily been prevented if Jack had simply refused to give Jimmy a joint. He was driving after all, so why would you give him some weed to smoke if he's going to be driving you back? I definitely wouldn't, especially since they were right outside of his head dealer's office and in broad daylight on a populated street. He even commented on it before they drove off. First off, he never should have given him a joint to smoke if he was driving. Secondly, he shouldn't have let Jimmy drive after smoking it. He should have just taken the wheel himself before leaving. So really, that's mostly on Jack's head, like most of the problems in the movie. He's a real piece of shit. Jimmy is portrayed as being addicted to the drug, which would explain why he would want to smoke up before driving, but any reasonable individual would refrain from doing so because they know that their life, as well as the life of others around them, could be impacted by operating heavy machinery while under the influence. I would hope that at the very least, most people would simply save the joint until later. Unfortunately, not everyone would make this decision, which is why we still have DUIs today. But the film tries to imply that Jimmy is so addicted he can't go without his fix, like it's heroin or something. The true moral of that incident is don't drive or let others drive while under the influence, whether it be alcohol, marijuana, or any other kind of substance. Hell, you shouldn't even be driving if you took cough syrup that makes you drowsy. Just don't do it, plain and simple. The gunshot could have been avoided with proper firearms handling and safety. Jack pulled it out to use it like a club, but it was accidentally fired while they were tussling. It's generally never a good idea to be waving a firearm around blindly, and this also could have been prevented had Jack simply not pulled it out. He didn't really need it in the first place. I mean, what was he planning to do? Shoot Ralph or Bill? It was completely unnecessary, and is another perfect example of how big a douche he is. He demonstrated zero firearm discipline, but what can you expect? He is a criminal after all. Jack really is a dick in this movie. If anything, he's really the main thing that should have been avoided. Like, hey kids, stay away from that guy. He may be selling marijuana, but it's him you want to worry about, not his herb. Really goes to show that people are the problem. Maybe the film should have been titled, Tell Your Children About Jack. He used Blanche and Ralph to lure other young people into his circle, getting them back to the apartment where he and May provided a fun place to hang out and cut loose. Of course, getting them hooked on the Mary Jane to generate business prospects, uncaring of the effects it had on their lives. It's the same shtick over again, essentially warning you to look out for people who pretend to be your friend with intentions of using you instead. That's the real danger, and it's a story as old as time. Because if there's anything that can be learned from history, it's that human beings are more than willing to use and manipulate each other, especially if there's money to be made. The only character that shows any kind of real negative effects directly related to using marijuana is Ralph. It states that he became incurably insane from the drug, but in reality that doesn't happen and has never happened in the history of humanity. I mean, all the other characters have been using it too, and none of them went batshit crazy like he did. I think the real reason for his condition is a pre-existing disposition and rough life compounded with the guilt of attempted rape that resulted in an accidental murder and conviction of an innocent man, which he expected would result in an execution. That kind of thing can definitely weigh on a man, and I think he just couldn't handle it all. It's true that at the end he was smoking copious amounts of weed, but that isn't going to make you bash in some dude's brain. If anything, he'd pass out from how sleepy he'd get, or just sit on the couch in a zonked stupor. Oh, and remember how Jimmy ran over that dude? Because he was high on the marijuana poisoning?
That's a side effect of the marijuana poisoning.
Nothing happened. No consequences. Jack was the only person who knew the truth, and now his head more closely resembles a jack-o'-lantern that fell victim to Halloween troublemakers. Yeah, a jack-o'-lantern. After he tells Jimmy not to talk, we never hear about it again. Loose end much? So let's do a final tally here. We have a total of 4 deaths in the movie. Death 1 is the pedestrian that was run over by Jimmy while driving under the influence. Since this was a DUI situation, we can technically count that one as being caused by marijuana, but with an addendum citing the exaggerated effects of this substance and the irresponsible decisions on Jack's part. Death 2 is Mary, who was accidentally shot with Jack's pistol. This cannot be contributed to marijuana at all, as it was an accidental discharge, plain and simple. It could happen to anyone and in any situation where firearms are being mishandled. Plus, Bill had every reason to attack Ralph as he was attempting to force himself upon Mary. Death 3 was Jack, being murdered by Ralph, who was hanging by a thread at that point. He was under much stress and guilt and already suspected that Jack was going to kill him, which was actually correct. I'm not saying that what he did was justified, but all these factors must be considered, and by doing so you find it's not reasonable to assume marijuana is to blame for his behavior. At least not the sole contributor. It may have added to the mix, but I think it is mostly exaggerated by the film as part of the scare tactics. Death 4 was Blanche, who was sober as a bird when she jumped out the window. She sure couldn't fly like one though. But that's another one that cannot be directly attributed to marijuana usage. So we have 4 deaths in the film, out of which 2 cannot be directly attributed to marijuana usage. The other 2 technically can, but there are additional factors associated with each and thus cannot be fully contributed directly. And what can be contributed directly are based on incorrect and exaggerated effects, so it holds even less water. Reefer Madness implies that all these deaths and other incidents that occurred in the movie are a result of getting involved with the wrong crowd and marijuana, but I think that the only part that really is necessary is the choice of company. If you remove the nefarious characters, namely Jack and Ralph, most of the events in the movie would never have happened, even if marijuana still was present. Ultimately, it highlights the need for education of youth about such matters so they can better be informed to make decisions when those situations arise. I agree with this. However, if you're going to do this, you must also ensure to educate using facts instead of scare tactics. It is important to give examples of negative outcomes in order to facilitate the understanding of possible consequences, but they need to be realistic, and this movie is just a bit over the top. Despite this, it is still an entertaining movie and isn't without the occasional nugget of wisdom if you really look at it, but the film wasn't designed to be that deep. It's more of an in-your-face, if you take even one hit, your life is over kind of deal. It's outdated and inaccurate, but it's still an interesting piece of history. I encourage you to watch it and analyze it for yourself. I've included a link in the description to where you can find it, so check it out if you're feeling frisky. Thanks for watching.
Hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted.